Welcome, everybody, to the August 2026 news version of the Display Skeptics podcast. I'm here, as always, with Carl Gutak, and boy, do we have a lot of stuff for you guys today. Obviously, some big things from Meta, from maybe Apple. We'll talk about that later, but also some really interesting news about what, at least for me, is the first time I'm seeing silicon carbide in a consumer product from a waveguide perspective.
Yeah, it
More
didn't
on
take
that
very
later.
long.
It did not.
Start seeing that.
Yeah, but we'll get to that later. Let's maybe start off with just the product launches and announces. And honestly, I think this is getting to be untenable to cover all in one slide, but we'll do our best here. Number one is Snap. I think I was skeptical when at AWE they did not give an actual date for when they would launch this year, but they're now saying September 16th is when we can see more specs for the specs. That still doesn't inspire a launch date to me. That says it's the launch of the launch. I don't know about you, Carl.
I hear they're finally going to give public demos, though, or they're going to give demos to people.
Yeah.
I just saw some people saying they were going to get to see it.
Nice.
Actually get the look through one. Because, that was really a big faux pas at AWE where they everybody expected they were going to get the look through them and said they were showing the old model and the new model was under glass.
Yeah. So that's unfortunate that, at AWE it didn't work out, but we'll be at Micro LED Connect, I guess, and dialing into these launches, see what they're doing there.
Yeah, we'll be over there. That's true. We'll be over there at the time.
The other side is on the more display glass, the bird baths. It's not even prism optics. These are both purely bird bath because they're the entry level versions for the X-Real and the Viture display glasses. Both these launched in the last month or so. The XBX for X-Real, that's their consumer budget friendly brand, and then Viture, still under the top brand, launched the Viture Pros 2. At this point, there's not really much to say about these. I'm probably not going to even do teardowns of these because it's a very, very standard bird bath at this point. A little bit of light weighting. I think all of these are now in the 60 to 70 gram range, which for those not keeping track is lighter than the Meta Ray-Ban display glasses. But yeah, it's an interesting category and kind of just keep an eye on where they're taking it.
Yeah, these are the slightly modified bird baths, right? These are going to use the solid prism ones versus
no.
ones. These
the
are still
entry level. Yeah, the entry level, the $299. I think both of these retail at $299 US. Those are the traditional bird bath.
Okay.
The prism optics is
there's half a dozen more. I mean, maybe a dozen or more of these guys. I mean, I think you can go in China. There are people who just make the bird bath optics, and you can be in business.
Exactly.
I mean, they're certainly doing a more complete version with much more software and other things around it. But I'm just saying, the glasses themselves, from an optics standpoint, aren't all that interesting anymore.
Yeah. I think we'll come back to this when Aura officially launches, Project Aura, which is the X-Real Google collaboration. That is the prism optic that you're talking about, and a much wider field of view. I think 70 plus degrees is what they're claiming. But more importantly, true, video pass through. They've got a lot more features and a lot higher price commensurately for that device.
Yeah.
A lot of monochrome green plus surface relief grading waveguide glasses have launched. Ray Neo has a new device here. Nemo Mind, which is what I'm wearing and I just recently tore down. Nemo, a 29 gram version. And funny enough, this is why we wanted to talk about this, even Halliday, right? Where Halliday was using a very unique type of optic that we'll go to through on the next slide. They are now moving towards the monochrome green plus sRG.
I don't think their product ever made market. I think they showed it. They did a demo.
The version 1 came out, and frankly, I see a lot of these on eBay because I think people just really didn't like the position of that display.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way that we introduce the next company that's shipping something, which is Brilliant Labs. Babak, their CEO, is an ex-Apple guy, and he started this originally with a monocle, right? Essentially a modified bird bath. That became the frame, which is 2 monocles, and now they're moving to what is very similar to the Halliday optic that we're going to cover on the next slide.
Yeah, well, I think one of the pieces of news this week is that Brilliant Lens is shipping their Halo product. They've been talking about it for about a year now. A little bit confusing because Halliday came out with something very similar from a looks point of view, and I've already written a big article about that back at CES a year ago. I already wrote an article with my reservations about that type of display. $400 seems a little high. The weight is okay. I mean, it's on the lighter end of what we're seeing today because you got to still put batteries and other stuff in it, even if your optics are really light. It makes it, well, let's talk about, first of all, what they're doing. They're putting a little teeny tiny projector in there, and they're directly projecting into the eye. It's almost like looking down the barrel of a projector. I'm pretty sure, as we see at the bottom, I'm pretty sure they're doing mirror optics. Halo almost definitely was. It's actually, the first time I saw this type of optics was Mojo Vision. I call it the reverse telescope. It works kind of like those big telescopes, Newtonian telescopes or whatever, only in reverse. The light comes from where the focus would be and works its way out and then gets collimated. So basically what you're doing is you're using the mirrors to collimate the light so it's now in focus. Because one of the problems, and people ignore this on a lot of products, I just wrote an article on my blog talking about this problem with near eye. If you put a display right up against your eye, you can't focus. You have to move the focus out. So what this optics is doing is taking the display and moving the focus out to infinity or near infinity, so it's in your far vision. But this type of optics, like I say, Mojo Vision did it. They put it on a contact lens. You can do the same thing, just not quite as severe because you're not quite as close to it. So you change the mirrors and stuff a little bit. But I think this is what they're doing based on what I've seen. I've not seen anybody admit to these optics, but just based on the pictures I've seen, trying to figure out, well, how would you do this? I'm pretty sure it's this reverse, well, I call it a reverse telescope effect. Anyway, the beauty of this is since the optics are not in the frames, well, it makes it really easy to add prescriptions. You can basically go to any place that could add prescriptions to glasses, and it's easy to drop a prescription lens in there. The problem is that you've got almost an infinitesimal eye box. Unless you're looking right down the barrel of this projector, you're not going to see any image at all. And when you do see it, it's going to be a very small, your eyes basically got to be in exactly the right place. Worse yet, ergonomically, it's terrible. You have to look up to see. Now, if you go to my article on Halliday on my website, I detail all this on there and talk about how you got to aim your eye up and all. I didn't want to kind of repeat all the same things again.
Right.
But looking up to see the image, anybody who knows much about visual ergonomics knows that the human brain is mental. Humans are engineered to look down. And the joke is there's a lot more things on the ground that can kill you than things in the air. Most birds and whatnot aren't real threatening, but snakes and coyotes and all kinds of things might be threatening to you at ground level. So everything about your human physiology tends to work towards things looking down. This is why if you're going to build an AR display, it's generally better if you're going to put it at the center of the vision or lower, not above the center of vision. There's been several products that have this look up aspect, and I always comment on it that it's ergonomically not good. If you have to look up constantly, it's really hard on the muscles in your eye. Humans are not engineered to do that. By the way, it's the same thing for looking down. People, when you put a computer monitor, they say your computer monitor, the top of the monitor shouldn't be above your eye level. You want to be always, because you're going to rotate your head down. So everything about the human physiology, from the eye to the neck and everything, is geared to looking down as opposed to looking up. Anyway, a little bit of off the
physiology
human factors.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of chatter online. People have actually gotten the Halliday glasses now for at least a few months, if not almost a year. And the overall consensus is that, the display is just not that great. I think, they are monochrome green, like a lot of our other glasses that we have with the SRGs these days, micro LED plus SRG, but it's in this ergonomically uncomfortable place that just makes it not a great experience. And at that point, if you're not really using the display because it's just not comfortable to use, why wouldn't you get, just a pair of audio glasses? which can do exactly the same thing.
Yep. And while it's similar, we should point out these are in color. So they're apparently using it like an
Yes.
OLED, whereas I'm pretty sure Halliday was using like either a green LED or a green OLED, but it was using a green only display. So, and there's some other things like I think there's what they call stray light that comes out of this type of optics. There's also this stray light. And so when you look a little offline, you see halos and stuff like that. Sadly,
maybe that's why they called it Halo.
Yeah. So we talked about having to look up to see the image. The other thing that bothers me a little bit is there's no independent videos or open demos or anything. They've just kind of you look online and you can't find anything showing anybody kind of wearing them and talking about it. So there's not a lot I can say on that regard, although it's always a little suspicious to me. It's kind of like a movie that opens without premieres. You're always a little bit there's all these little telltale signals we've developed. I've been in the business, I've been in the industry for nearly 50 years, and you kind of learn the sense that I always say what they're not saying or what they're not doing tells a lot about what they are doing. What they talk about, what they show. If they only show cartoons, then maybe they can't control their colors well. If I see a demo with lots of colors all over the place, well, then that means they probably have color uniformity problems. And what they're hiding it by is by putting up so much color up there, you can't tell what's wrong. Unfortunately, these tricks are, pretty well known now. I've been in computer graphics.
Tried and true, right? They work.
70s. So anyway, it's
in their defense, Carl, I think they are some of the more open people about the hardware that they're choosing, how everything works. I mean, they're basically trying to be a very, very upfront, open hardware development company. And so I'm not exactly sure why they haven't shipped these to people to just review them right before launch, right? Like you said, a lot of these other glasses, like the ones we're wearing, end up being in people's hands before they go on sale so that people can get relatively unbiased reviews. This didn't happen for Halo, and I think that's a shame because otherwise I really like what they're doing, the open development nature of the hardware in this space.
Yeah, I think they're still, as we talked about, though, they're still going to face a lot of the same problems. That's why I talked about, like I say, look at my website. I have an article on there on Halo. By the way, this is one of the other things I was trying to dissect. They do a lot of good stuff in terms of showing how they're building it. Like this is from like almost a year old, where they were talking about their prototype. And you can kind of see and hear, this is a 3D render on the left. And then you've got these are two different still frames. You can kind of see that there's a mirror in there. And I'm assuming this top little gray thing in the center is probably a mirror kicking back and blocking the light. I'm not 100% sure. I emailed them to find out, but I never got a reply. But I have a pretty good feeling this is what they're doing to make that optic work. Based off, I'm pretty sure that's it looks more obvious than Halliday in what they were doing. So anyway, this is a supposition on my part based on what I'm seeing from the very little bit of information I have. We'll see if it proves out to be correct. So I would take this still as I say this is the possible optics. I'm not saying it for sure what they're doing.
Yeah.
It'd be nice. Look, in many ways, I like them. I like, they were very open. I got to see previews of their monocle. They were way out, like a year before they ever came with the monocle. They were showing me demos and they were going to conferences and showing them around, and nothing here. I've not seen one of these in the wild, nor did I see any, like I say, influencer types who are always going to be glowing. I mean, you have to understand the people who give demos tend to give glowing reviews. That's why people don't tend to ship me stuff so much, because I'm not going to give them necessarily the glowing review. They tend to ship them to people who have a lot of influence, a lot of followers, who are also going to be very positive about everything they see. So the positivity is, I never take as, I almost filter it out now, but I do look at the videos because a lot of times they reveal stuff because they're doing it. I like to look at videos, and we'll see when we talk about some other products we're going to talk about today, that the videos tell you a lot because there's more unguarded moments, more things that can happen. Whereas if you're just looking at a company thing, a lot of times their videos are tightly contained and they edit out the stuff they don't want you to see and so forth. Yep.
Well, we'll take a look at more of those videos later.
Yep.
I think next we'll cover a little bit of Meta, because we always have to, the big player in the room. Two big news stories broke over the last month. One on anti-tampering and how the pervert glasses, so affectionately named in the internet zeitgeist, have actually made Meta actually take action in terms of being able to disable the device if you have tampered with your indicator LED, but then also to take legal action against people who are providing these types of services, who are, maybe carving out the ALS or the indicator LED and making it so that you can't ever see if somebody's recording you. I really think this is very interesting. I mean, 100% agree that this is maybe one particular route to this dystopian nightmare of always-on surveillance, which is already happening with the like of Flock and Axon cameras everywhere around the US. I don't know why we've hyper-indexed on the Meta glasses, which generally are not as widely adopted as these much more intrusive surveillance elements that are constantly watching. Yeah, this was interesting to see, and Meta try to rehab.
They've managed to through the years managed to upset people from different political persuasions, let's just say, for different reasons. And so,
right,
kind of like everybody's suspicious of them. Mark Zuckerberg has through the decades engendered a lot of distrust, and so there's a little bit of kicking on Meta. No, we did see with Google as well, when the glass hole effect and whatnot like that. People are a little more scared of the thing being on all the time. At least, as people say, you're a little more if you're holding your phone up doing something, it's one thing. But if you're going to put these glasses everywhere, but they're talking about putting cameras in earbuds, where you have where your Apple earbuds are hanging down. Well, you put a little camera at the end of that. It's going to be tough to contain. Now, as I've always said, I don't think the big boys are interested in these things if they don't put cameras on them. I think it's both for good and ill. Good is because I think the functionality's increased a bunch. It's very hard if you're using AI to say, well, what am I looking at? Or if I'm trying to improve like I said, one of my big things is, well, where did I put something? Well, if the camera's not seeing what you're doing, it can't tell you where you put the thing. That kind of stuff. So there's a huge functional lift from having the camera there. Of course, on the downside is you have the innocent stuff, which is basically they want to data aggregate. They want to collect all this information. And as I said, we put a camera, looked at your eye and a camera facing out, and we know a lot about what you're doing and what you're interested in. Like, do you interested in that product? Are you watching a video and you get interested in something? Oh man, that movie company would really like to know what's exciting you as you're watching the movie and all like that. So yeah, there's good and ill that come out of it. And then there's the real technology where it's the surveillance state and all that other stuff.
Yeah. But it's interesting to see, and a net positive that Meta is trying to rehab their image here with something that they could have done from day one. I think you remember on the Meta Ray-Ban displays, I told you you can just unplug the ALS and the indicator LED, and everything still functions as normal.
Yeah.
You don't get auto brightness adjustment, but you certainly can still record. And so this could have been done from day one. It wasn't. Better late than never.
Yep. Yep. We'll say we're also saying, and I don't know if we're going to talk about that today, but I know a lot of these things, a lot of those little LED indicators, some are rather annoying, almost to the point of annoying, like it's blinking and whatnot. Yeah. And some of them are almost invisible, and probably in daylight are invisible.
Yeah. And I mentioned that about these MeMo mines, right? They have an indicator LED. There's no camera, but they do have this memory functionality to always record audio, so they can parse that and then remind you what you said, or if you planned to make a meeting verbally at some point. The indicator LED is completely unobservable. It's this dull red light that happens on the side of the temple, so nobody actually knows that it's happening. So yeah, there's two camps here for the privacy aspect of whether or not you're constantly recording with your smart glasses.
Yep.
The last part on Meta is sales of the smart glasses. This was actually an interesting deep dive that was done by Mike Boland over at ARinsider.co. But it's important to note this was all an assumed sales volume for the various devices that the Meta Reality Lab sells. So the only thing that's actually a number that has been officially filed with the SEC by Meta is this $402 million top level revenue that MRL generated in Q2. Everything else is an estimated revenue share of each of the products and estimated unit sales of those products based off of some, again, estimate on what is the average sale price and what is the revenue split with EssilorLuxottica, right? Because remember, a lot of these glasses, except for some of the most recent ones that just came out for Meta, are co-branded with EssilorLuxottica.
Yeah, another thing to note is that usually Q2 is a very slow consumer quarter. So you might want to multiply these numbers by like 6 or something, not by 4.
For full year.
Yeah, for a full year, if you know, and of course we'll see how these products roll out through the year, because we'll probably see a heavy rollout coming very soon. So you're going to have new product coming in and whatnot. I think the ratios are interesting, but as once again, I'm not sure these are based on a lot of really, they're interesting numbers and they give us something to talk about, and they're maybe not orders of magnitude off, but understand these are purely Mike Borland's estimates. Right. They're not really based on stuff, but the number, the 400 million is interesting, since we know they're spending what, about 3-4 billion a quarter. So it's not a very good return on the money spent so far. But it's also interesting to look at the ratio of estimate. And these are estimates of revenue. So you got to look at the unit column, and you know, the units are going to be smaller for the more expensive products. But it's kind of interesting to see where things have come out. You know, you get a feeling for
I think it's something good to keep an eye out, right? I take everything here with a grain of salt. I'm sure Mike had great assumptions and reasons that he made all of these assumptions, but we really can only take trends from this. But it's certainly something I'll keep an eye out on as he releases more and more of these post Q2, Q3 financial release.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking to me how little the Quest 3 and Quest 3S's are selling. That's what, 300,000? Because they were selling, I thought the Quest 2 got up to almost 10 million in a year. So even you multiply those numbers by 6, that's not a very big number. Not compared to 10 million, nearly 10 million. Because I thought that's where they peaked. You know, I always talk about decades, that, you know, it's like get to 10,000 is one level, and 100,000 is another level, 1 million is a different level, and 10 million is another. And you can kind of see where the VR headsets kind of started to approach the 10 million barrier and then turned around. And that's why I think a lot of companies are kind of down on VR. And this year is going to be really exciting because, you know, because of all the AI and data center stuff soaking up all the memory chips, it's dominoed into everything else. And it's going to mean a much sadder year, I think, because a lot of people are holding back on products, and products are taking longer to get to market and the whole thing because there's such a supply shortage of components.
So we'll see. I think it's early days for the glasses side of things, and obviously Meta's done a great job of continuing to push these and lift overall sales. But yeah, for VR, I think we're in another winter. The 2024 winter is also the 2026 winter.
Yeah, they're talking about game systems pulling back. I've just been seeing other people talk about how what is it? PlayStation's doing different things, and they're all trying to figure out what to do because the cost of their components are so high now. They don't really want a loss leader with the machines, and are they making it back on games? And they're not making enough on the games, so they can't really afford the loss leader of the machines, and particularly with component prices going through the roof.
We'll see. It's a brave new world in this data center race. So when and if that bubble ever bursts, and it will, we'll see if anything actually comes back down to reality in terms of pricing for components, or if people realize they can just keep that artificially high.
Yeah, if I can inject one more thing from my old days, you know, I was telling you in the pre-show that, you know, I worked in video RAMs. I did a thing called the video RAM and got involved in the synchronous DRAM in the early days of that, when we were to help define that stuff. And, you know, back then there were like 20 companies, mostly from Japan. But there were about 20 DRAM companies, major DRAM companies, plus little guys. But almost all the big semiconductor companies at one point or another had a DRAM division. And so what happened is they all went bankrupt. They all either went bankrupt or got out of the business. So all these guys got out of the DRAM business, and really there's only like 3 major guys left. Now we talked about there may be some Chinese guys starting to get in, but there's 3 major. We went from over 20 companies to where everybody was killing themselves to basically everyone died off, and now you've got these 3 guys who have a somewhat of a stranglehold on the high end of this market.
Yeah. And, that's the nature of the semiconductor industry, the crystal cycle that goes up and down, boom and bust, not necessarily following the, what?
Yeah, well, they are dependent on the PC and phones and things. And what happened is that people may notice, we used to always get, they'd always add 4 times the DRAM every 3 years. We get 4 times the DRAM for the same price. That was the DRAM business when I was doing it back in the 80s and 90s. 4 times the thing. So every 3 years, you'd upgrade your system and put 4 times the DRAM in. Well, what happened to the PC is that they reached a point where he said, well, 4 times doesn't buy me anything anymore. They started putting caches on CPUs and all this other stuff. So what happened is you no longer bought a new PC and even when you bought a new PC, you said, well, I don't need 4 times the DRAM anymore. It doesn't buy that much. And so basically PCs topped out on how much DRAM they put in. It stopped out in the gigabytes. We started with megabytes and it stopped out in gigabytes. So it grows by 1,000x, but it did not continue to grow. And because of that, the DRAM guys, basically the market died. The unit sales, the PC unit sales were there, but they were buying the same amount of DRAM. And these guys are like, well, wait a minute. And then people started taking longer to buy their stuff and all. But anyway, but what happened is the market kind of died because it didn't continue to grow, so it couldn't sustain all those companies. And now all of a sudden, you have this whole new use for them, and there's just nobody to supply it all.
So hopefully next year, but based on reports that capacity for memory is already sold out through all of 2027, I don't think it's going to be until 2028 or later that we actually start seeing a return to normalcy and, maybe unit sales for consumer electronics.
Yeah, and I think even the DRAM companies, they're all sitting there saying, well, we can add some more capacity, but do we want to go crazy? Because the problem you play with this is rock, paper, scissors. If you add on a whole bunch of capacity, and even if you're right, but the capacity it only hits 50% of how much more you needed, you can lose a lot of money because you're playing with billions and billions of dollars to build these fabs. So it's a rock, paper, scissors thing. If you guess wrong, either high or low, you can really be creamed.
Well, on the same vein of the big tech giants, we'll move on to Apple. I think this is, I don't normally talk too much about my former employer because I'm not allowed to. But 2, I just don't think there's anything interesting to talk about in the rumor mill because they're so often so wrong until you're, probably 1 or 2 months away from launch. And the big news, at least from the Apple Glass perspective, was that this is going to be a health device. Gurman published this in Bloomberg. And I find this so funny. It's so vague that he just can't be wrong about this. Yes, a pair of glasses can be a health device and that they'll fix your vision because there'll be a pair of glasses. And then he's right? It's just, I don't understand why this really ticked up so high in the news about the Apple glasses because we're so far from Apple realistically releasing a product here. I honestly,
I think they're following off the watch. I think everyone kind of saw that the Apple Watch really didn't go anywhere until it started getting sold as a health device. So I think this is kind of a no-brainer assessment. And then it goes back to things like, I know they're putting like sensors in the earbuds to measure your blood pressure or your heart rate and all this stuff. And of course, we've talked about on prior shows that you're a big believer, and I agree with you, that camera shot into the eye will sense things, maybe glaucoma, maybe other things going wrong with you. So this is kind of a no-brainer that they're going to put sensors up there because they want to make sure that these things are not just pervert glasses. I mean, Apple's got the reputation. If anybody can make this go, their privacy reputation is the strongest of all the big companies. Now there'll be some who will argue whether that's totally deserved or not, but they're definitely.
But it doesn't matter. It's what the consumer perceives, right?
Yeah, they're perceived the best amongst all the giants. But then the question will be is what happens with these cameras, and can even they, put the cameras in on the face? But if you don't have the cameras, I think your functionality goes way down. Now there's still going to be sensors and all, and some people think, well, maybe they'll get away with almost LiDAR only or non-visible light cameras for things like sensing, like maybe they can read stuff or they can tell what building you're looking at. Like, for example, if you're out walking around, you like the camera to look at the buildings. And from that, you could, because, if you go out in like San Francisco or a big city, you get all these multi-path reflections and GPS is wildly inaccurate. But if you had camera view, well, of course, you could get really precise, combining all this info, you can do it. So we'll see, but there's talk that they there's some talk out there that they might you might avoid visible cameras and just do LiDAR and infrared cameras and stuff like that to try to avoid it. Although we'll see how that actually we'll see how that it's got to be tested in the market.
Exactly. My gut feeling is that Apple has too much to lose to enter a new product category in a very, very unique way these days, right? It's not the iPhone moment anymore.
Didn't they try that? I thought there was this product. What was it called? Apple Vision Pro. Oh yeah. Didn't they try that already?
After how many years of Meta already doing this, right? So my point is that they were not first to market. They weren't even second or third or fourth or fifth to market. They were almost probably last to market in that space, and even that isn't a wild success. So I think this is going to be the same thing here. I don't think we will see anything on any Apple smart glasses that we haven't seen on the market before. And so if something comes out next year, look at the glasses that are around at the start of 2027, and those are at best the hardware components that you'll find in this type of device.
And then the question will be, display, I think, it's an order of magnitude more complexity to this problem. It's not just a little harder. You've got into the whole prescription flow and everything else. Whereas if you're just putting out frames, maybe Apple frames, then you can snap in. The whole ecosystem is set up to snap lenses into frames, but not to add lenses to waveguides. And that's a big point I keep making. But I think it's a bigger hill than people realize. I think they underestimate how big a disruption that is to try to how to get product to people. So yeah, we'll see. We'll have to keep watching the rumor mills and what
as always
to see how it happens.
Next is Magic Leap. This is, unfortunate, sad. We keep talking about layoffs in this industry. I don't think it's only this industry, but nevertheless, we cover this. They just announced additional layoffs. I think these were primarily in the Bay Area this time. But yeah, it's rough times. But I think you found some interesting things on their website about what they're doing as the now waveguide manufacturer that they're rebranding.
Yeah, they're obviously focused on waveguide. I think they're saying optics and the whole optical chain design and manufacturing. And I like to point out, I started covering them, and they were a big thing for my blog. And when I kind of have been in a startup, I got out of this startup, and I heard there's this $3 billion startup. I'm like, who's and they're going to do laser. At the time, the thought was that they were showing that they were going to do laser fiber scanning, and they were going to do all this divergence accommodation conflict stuff. And I started looking, and I said, this is all smoke. This is
no mirrors.
Well, by the way, I start with premise. I've watched so many different things with laser displays, and they've all been scams. At the same time, there was Surratt and Ritod and a few others who were doing wrist projectors. They were going to project an image off their wrist using a laser scanning. So by that point in time, I'd seen so many laser scanning projector scams that I said, well, I start with the supposition anybody talks about laser projection is a scam, and I work back to find the scam. Kind of working in reverse. But anyway, so I was a little bit, the fact they were going to do lasers. Of course, they didn't in the end use lasers. They used LCOS. But they became much more conventional. If you look at their whole, I did a search of their patents and the whole thing. I have a whole big series, probably about 20 articles on them through the years. But they did kind of make the blog kind of famous in the AR world for my teardown, my looking through their patents and predicting 2 years ahead of time what they were going to do. But anyway, what's interesting, and one of the main reasons I put this in, is I will be on an AR, the AI XR podcast, who Ronnie Abovitz, who's one of the founders of Magic Leaks, one of the co-hosts. I don't think we're acrimonious to each other these days, but it should be interesting. It's going to be the first time we kind of meet, even if it's going to be virtually. Anyway, on the website, though, it's interesting. They show one of their waveguide, and this is very what I call wave optics like. It's a what I call a 2D expanding waveguide. It looks to me like there's no 3 gratings. Most conventional waveguides have 3 gratings. They have an entrance grating, a turning grating, or one expansion grating, and then they have an exit grating. This is showing more of a wave optics like, and I call it that because they're the first guy I've seen to do this type of waveguide, where they have a 2D expansion, and then the grating in front of the eyes is both expanding and it's exiting the light. So they're showing that, and then on the right was interesting in the videos. They were showing this flexible grating. I think it's a grating. It wasn't clear in the video what it is, but I'm assuming it's a flexible waveguide or plastic. Maybe it's on plastic, or as you suggested, it might be on a flexible glass. But it's interesting. They make a point in this to squeeze it and show you that it's bending and whatnot. So should be interesting.
Now that they're at least publicly hyper-focused on waveguide engineering, I can see this going more the traditional route of, hey, AR is a small market. We're going to see what else we can do in machine vision, in DOEs and HOEs for other applications outside of just smart glasses.
Yeah,
so it's possible we're looking at other things. This
gets to a whole ecosystem issue. I've always said that AR, from my perspective, has a somewhat unhealthy ecosystem. I dealt in products that, I wouldn't even, when I was in my days at Texas Instruments, I wouldn't have looked at a product that didn't have millions of units. My TAM, or my expected market, had to be millions of units, and the whole TAM should be maybe tens or hundreds of millions of units, but at least many millions of units. It's really hard as a component supplier, because you're really supplying a component here. It's really hard to say, how do you get enough dollars per unit times enough units to have a business? This is the problem in all of our AR things. You say, well, we need the glasses that cost $300. Well, okay, now let's look at what $300 means to the guy who's selling your display channel. You're going to give him $20. Okay, he gets $20, and that's not all profit. Maybe it's only any profit, but let's say he can make profit at $20. Let's say he makes $10 and sells it for $20. How does he keep the lights on? How does he pay for his R&D? How does he pay for his fab? I don't see how it all works. And that's a continual theme problem I see as when I put on my economic or my business hat as a technologist. I say, how do you make money if you can only give people up and down? You have to make, for a sustained ecosystem for a product, everybody along the way has to make money. Anybody not making money drops out. He eventually says, I'm done with this. I was talking earlier about DRAM business. That's what happened to DRAMs. They basically said, we're not making any money. This is no fun. And everybody but 3 companies dropped out. And once you had only 3 companies, now those 3 companies can make money. But everyone else had to die first so those guys could make money.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye out, right? I think you're right. It's going to be really hard to see Magic Leap as just a component provider in this space and really be able to sustain the volumes in, even in the U.S. domestic market to actually be able to make money and stay in business. But
yeah, they've got some big competitors. You look at like Gore-Tex. Gore-Tex is a giant in this field. And they're making, it seems like almost every other company I ever look at, you trace them back and Gore-Tex involved. And they're doing waveguides, they're doing optics, and they're already there existing and got supply chains and everything else going. So it's
and dozens of other small and medium companies.
I'm not wishing a mill. I'm just analyzing what's going on.
Yeah. So it's gonna be tough, but we'll see. We have to see, where they go now that they're maybe more hyper focused, specifically on the, what is a very strong core competency for them, right? They were absolutely doing a lot of very interesting stuff on the waveguide design.
Yep.
All right, next is an interesting one. We don't often talk about cooling here. We talk about thermal management, but how to do that actively, we don't talk much. Carl, do you want to cover xMEMS?
Yeah, just a little bit. Unfortunately, I'm going to actually have an interview with him a little bit later, but so this is going based off of the publicly available information. But xMEM it's basically a piezoelectric cooler. So you basically vibrate this piezoelectric at ultrasonic rates, and you create these vibrations that then cause airflow. So you're basically, it's somewhat a solid state, depending on how you consider piezoelectric, but the engine, it's not your traditional rotating fan motor. And the idea is you're above the audio range, and the vibrations are very, very small. So you're not creating any physical feeling, nothing a human would feel. So there's no sound, and there should be no noise out of this vibration, but you're going to pump air. Basically, it's a way of pumping air. And they just announced their XMC 1200, which is real small. It does not move a lot of air. Of course, they talk about 10 cc's per second, which is not a unit I'm used to doing. So I had to go online to find the translator. That's 0.0212 cubic feet per minute, which is where through history, that tends to be where everyone would use, even though it's archaic units now, but people tend to talk in cubic feet per minute. It's kind of a lot of power for moving that little bit of air, but it is small. And their claim is they can get about a 10-degree cool seat for about with a 1 watt thermal load. So if you had a 1 watt load, they can move it down about 10 degrees C, and they have an ASIC that drives it and goes with it to drive it. Somewhat more easily to compare is their older product, a little bit older. It's about twice as big. It moves about 39 cc's per second, or about 0.08 cubic feet per minute. It's 150 milliwatts, so a little bit higher power. And its size is about 9 by 12 by only 1 millimeter thick. So the concept is that these things could fit into glasses somehow. They have to be fairly good size glasses, because you're still talking half an inch or third of an inch anyway for these things. But you could conceive of on large glasses fitting these. And I thought, well, what does that mean? Because I'm not a cooling expert, although I've always said, the amateurs worry about battery life, but the pros worry about thermal management. So thermal management is really important. And anyway, I decided to compare it to a Sunon fan. Sunons, you see these all over the place. These these really itsy bitsy fans that you put in when you really need a little bit of cooling. And it's fairly comparable in the amount of air it can move. And it's about 1/5 to 1/6 the volume. So that's a big one, and it's smaller in all dimensions, and particularly thin. So I mean, you can see how it could fit into the scheme of things. That's maybe takes a little more power for the same amount of airflow. But anyway, the numbers at least are not ridiculous. And they have some good demos on their website where they show it. And I don't totally understand the demo, but they've got a good video of it showing how they can really drop the temperature of stuff versus having nothing there. Now, the problem is, the problem with most things, people don't realize, when you have glasses, there's not a lot of room to radiate heat. You need ways to radiate heat, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later with one of the products we're talking about. But there's no way to radiate heat. You can put copper, or you can put like those little thermal tubes or whatever. They only move heat, but eventually the heat's got to be gotten rid of. And so the idea with fans is fans are noisy, and they're big and whatnot. So this idea is that maybe we can move some heat out of here, because this is a way to eject the heat into the atmosphere as opposed to letting it build up. Because basically, if you don't have any way for heat to radiate, it will just build and build and build and keep getting hotter and hotter.
Well, I think there is a lot of real estate to radiate if you're using relatively thick temples. It's just whether or not the material will actually allow you to radiate out, right? A lot of the really thick temple glasses that we have end up being plastic, some sort of acetate material that is going to be really thermally insulating. And so we see, like you said,
plastic coated too. So you get metal in there and you put plastic coating on it and you defeat it.
Exactly. So I am skeptical, as is the name of the channel, about how much we're really going to be able to do this, because you're consuming a not trivial amount of power here, right? 70 to 100 milliwatts of power to reduce the temperature by 10 Celsius, where you could have a different passive design that is more metal forward in terms of the frame material that you use, and more, copper tape, graphite tape that we see in a lot of these devices that helps extract the heat from the very localized high heat producing components and distributes it across the entire outside shell of your device. I wish them the best of luck. I just can't see how drawing another 100 milliwatts to do a 10C cooling in this form factor is going to be very, very compelling, especially when you consider that we are really space constrained for that fluid, or it's for that air to actually move inside of your glasses, right? I assume this 0.02 CFM or 10 cc per second is also a max with unconstrained airflow. So how is this going to look like when we actually have a lot of components in the way, your PCB, your audio module, etc.?
Yeah, where are you going to put it and whatnot? I imagine you're going to take thermal tape or something like that and try to move it to this thing and have it try to eject it. We'll have to see. Yeah. We did want to mention, while we're mentioning them, there are other companies. This is not the first company to think of using piezoelectric, basically piezoelectric fans to do it. There's a company called Frohr who has got their AirJet Mini, but I think it's for typically larger systems. That people talk about doing this for phones and laptops and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
but it's a real problem. It's a really important problem. One I covered in a recent video. I mean, you can get burned by smart glasses if the thermal management is poor, like some of the really cheap ones you'll see in them. I mean, one of the devices I tested, it got up to 76 Celsius. That is instant third-degree burn.
I thought against consumer protection laws. I think 50 is I thought the limit for something you can, if a human
physically touch it.
If a human can touch it, I thought 50 was like 50 degrees C was like the limit for consumer safety, because that'll burn. That can burn you. 50 is where you put your hand on it, your finger on it, and you can't hold it there.
Yeah.
So 70, you're starting to get to, that's pretty serious. That's pretty serious levels.
It's pretty bad.
What a lot of people don't get is heat builds. If you're injecting heat faster than it goes out, you're getting into basically thermal runaway, and it's going to keep going up until they reach a balance that the heat goes out as fast as the heat's coming in.
And that was 70 Celsius for this particular class. So I respect what these guys are doing, and we'll see. I'm skeptical that we're going to see active cooling in devices anytime soon. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's a little bit counterproductive, because you got to add another tenth of a watt of heat,
load,
tenth or so of heat to get the watt, to get the heat out. So yeah. All
right, next, Polar Light. A really cool micro LED producer. I think over in Finland or Sweden. I think it's in the Nordic countries somewhere.
Region, yeah. Polar Light's interesting. I got to see them a year ago at Display Week. They had a demo. This is a picture I took on the right of their red one. Red's the hard one, so I think that it's like they're bragging, when they show red, because red's the hard one. But they've entered in, they made a little bit of news saying they've signed a pilot line agreement. To me, their big thing, them and Halliday, and we're going to be seeing, I think, both of them probably in a few weeks when we go to the AR/VR Connect and Micro LED Connect in Eindhoven. But they and Halliday are making a big point about their LEDs are more collimated. One of the problems we have with most LED light is it's very Lambertian, which means it meets this cosine thing. If we look at the curve in the lower right, you kind of see the red thing. I believe that's the Lambertian curve, although it's usually more of a circle. Yeah. And then they're showing this more tightly formed ellipse, showing that the light distribution is going to be much more in one direction. And that's much better for building AR glasses. It turns out if you want a laptop display, you'd like it to be, or a television, on a television, you want it to be better than Lambertian. You want it to be more diffuse than Lambertian. So no matter where you're sitting in the room, the brightness doesn't change. People may remember, like on old laptops, how you had to be sitting almost straight in front of you, go a little bit off to one side or the other, the screen went dark or the color started shifting. Turns out when we're doing AR displays, you're just trying to get the thing in the eyeball, and because of that, you want the light to be very, very narrow. Plus, waveguides will only really accept the waveguides, be they reflective or diffractive, need highly collimated light to go in. You're basically not going to be able to use light. This light that's out in the lobes doesn't get used. This is one of the big problems for micro LEDs, is that a lot of the light they generate never makes it into the display itself. It's not coupled into it can't make it into the little hole that they have to do it. All this fancy stuff that I'm doing. Also, I think the important thing here is to mention is that at least they're trying to attack the big problem of trying to make the light exit more efficiently. We'll have to see how it all works out. I mean, they're facing some massive challenges. We've got several companies in China building micro LEDs, and they've got perhaps deeper pockets of backing them in terms of funding.
Certainly more mass production ready fabs. Yeah, I mean, there's also a little bit of an advantage on the polarization. I was talking with these guys last year about the intrinsic polarization that you can actually get out of these pillars. This is not quite as important in a lot of the waveguide structures that we see today, though I'm starting to read about higher waveguide efficiencies with incoming polarized light. So more on that later.
Well, it is important that a lot of things use mirror optics, and once you put mirror optics in there, like when we did the teardown of meta ray gun displays, they got mirrors in them. They're all the mirrors are a way to shape light without having chroma aberrations. But the problem is, if you use polarized light, you can switch it. These things called quarter wave plates. You put a quarter wave plate in front of a mirror, and when the light comes in one time and comes back out, it's polarized the other angle. And that's the way that you can make light go in and come back out. So if you have polarized, anybody using mirror optics is also going to polarize the light. So that's a bigger advantage than you might think, because people think the waveguide doesn't need polarized, right? But the optics before the waveguide might, because that'll let you make a more compact, efficient, and higher quality optics for very cheap. Mirror optics are really cheap too for the quality you get. So
we'll see. We're going to keep an eye on, and we'll talk to them here in a couple of weeks in September.
Some people thought that the U.S. Army totally got out of head-mounted displays. A lot of this GAO report came out and said basically they're not going to field them. So that they spent billions of dollars, and their contract was going to be billions more. This was a very famous IVAS contract that HoloLens got. And the Google, basically the government called a halt, or the GAO said, we're not deploying, you can't deploy this stuff. This is ridiculous. The Congress and everybody was looking into it. You're going to spend how much? And it was just a little bit of history, because I've been following, and I was involved in some stuff working in military headsets and stuff at about the same time. But it was developed. Basically the IVAS system was a variant of the HoloLens 2. They basically took the HoloLens 2 and developed it. A lot of people think it was a lost leader for Microsoft, whereas really they were trying to sell their cloud services, and so this was kind of a lost leader to sell cloud services. That's how they justified it. And then Amazon turned around and sued because they said that's not fair. You can't. You got to separate it. You got to make the cloud services an open bid. You can't just take the cloud services because you're doing this headset. Anyway, but the first award was in 2018. And a lot of people don't know this. I happen to have a little bit of inside information on that actually Magic Leap was the lead, and they were in the lead. They had wine and dined and convinced the general who was in charge of this that they should go with Magic Leap. And at the very last minute, the underlings said, no, we don't want to go with Magic Leap. We better see if we can convince. So they basically sweet talked Microsoft. So I think Microsoft somewhat got dragged into it, because it's an alternative to Magic Leap. And I have a feeling the egos got up, and probably somebody at HoloLens or at Microsoft said, well, we're not going to let this little pipsqueak company take it from us. But anyway, as people may know, in 2025 officially, I think it was actually announced before that, but it actually took a while. You don't just take over a contract with the government like that. It takes a long time. and eventually Anduril took over the program in 2025. But the key thing here is both A, they're not going to deploy this to troops. It's ridiculous. It was always ridiculous. And I put on the right here, you can kind of see this guy holding his weapon, a gun. And I was working with people who were Navy SEALs. And when they heard that you would have to hold, when they read an article that said that the soldiers would have to hold their gun differently to use it, they thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Because, they said, we trained for years how to hold the gun and how to do this. We're not holding the gun differently to put on a headset. It's just not going to happen. And so they thought that was funnier than all get out. One thing important to mention is there's still the government's not giving up. And this is still useful stuff. I think they just realized that this instantiation was insane. They'd gotten too big, too bulky, too much in the way. There are a lot of things wrong with it. But the idea that you want to have displays in front of eyes to help to augment humans is not going away. That's still going on. And that they now call it the Soldier Borne Mission Command, their SBMC project. And that's still being led by Anduril from their work with taking over the HoloLens effort. But there's also participation by Rivet, who I've written about on my blog, and Elbit, who's very famous. People don't know about it. Elbit's an Israeli company that's huge in military optics. They're all over military optics. Usually as a sub somewhere in there, but if you dig in there, Elbit's in their system. They're one of the leaders in military optical display stuff, among other stuff. They're into a lot of different fields. And then it got LG Harris, which is another one of these contractors that's all over the place. It's not big in terms, it's not in the billions, though. We're talking like, 150 million type contract, not the billions that we saw with the IVAS. I think they've kind of like regrouping and saying, let's go a little smaller and work our way back up again. Not necessarily dissimilar to the AR market in general, that we were doing the big AR headsets, the HoloLenses, and the Magic Leap. And now we're working back up from glasses, and we're doing glasses and AI glasses and stuff.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye on this. Like you said, there's quite a few players now, probably all part of one bigger contract like Rivet and Anduril. So I'm sure there's going to be more and more releases that we see and teased over the next couple of months.
I think I will say I'm much more excited by like an Anduril or somebody like that, or Rivet or any of these guys. All these guys excite me a lot more than Microsoft. Microsoft, it was always a gnat on the log to them. And so I don't think they were after other stuff. They weren't really invested in doing that. I do think that, good, better, and different, Anduril's Palmer Luckey, he believes in this stuff. Whether or not he'll be right or not, that's a different game. but definitely they believe in it. They're going to try to build a product. They're going to be much more focused, I think, on building something that does something, as opposed to trying to make something fit because we really want the cloud sales. That's just not the right way to go about it. So I'm a little more optimistic that something like this, because I do believe that the military, I think of all the markets we know of for AR, I think the military is one where you can really come down and make a solid case that with the technology is there that can really help a soldier do better. We just got to figure out how to put it together the right way. I just HoloLens wasn't it. They were starting from a terrible base and spent they really started spending the money, and they put the money hose on it before they knew what they were doing.
Final thing we'll cover today is conferences. We've already talked about Micro LED Connect and AR VR Connect. Carl and I will be there the entire from the 15th to the 17th with 2 master classes, one from each of us, as well as a panel discussion on that, I believe, Wednesday afternoon at 5 o'clock. I'll be at Euro Display the week after. I've got a conference in Dublin. Euro Display is every 2 years, and I'll give a talk on some more system level implications of what happens when you make a particular micro display tech choice, and why probably you should make your tech choice first, because that's going to drive the entirety of the rest of your system. And then, Carl, you've got a podcast coming up in November.
Yeah, I guess they're a pretty big one. As far as I understand, boy, they get some good guests and whatnot. I watch it. I think I don't know if it's weekly or whatnot, but it comes on pretty regularly. It's in my feed, so I always get it. But the AI XR podcast, I'm scheduled for November. They're actually stuffed up till November, so I'm scheduled to record in November with them. And like I say, the Charlie Fink is very famous in this industry, writes a lot of stuff, a former Disney Imagineer and all that stuff. Ronnie Abovitz, very famously Magic Leap, so that should be exciting. So hoping he's there. They don't always have all the co-hosts there. And Ted, Ted, I can't pronounce the last name, but he's going to be there too. I think he's been. These are both all three of these guys are very big industry people. Been around quite a bit. It's an excellent podcast. I don't always agree with everything they say, but I think it's still they have a lot of interesting content on there. And I met at AWE at the we were both Charlie Fink is, I think, a former, he'd been inducted, and I got inducted as a at AWE this year. And he said, "Hey, yeah, why don't we do your podcast together?" And I said, "Oh, sure, when?" And I was expecting like next month or a couple of weeks. And he said, "Well, we're booked through November." so we'll be doing that in a few months after I get back from AR/VR Connect.
There you go. And the last thing in November, the Bay Area SID chapter always does an AR/VR one-day conference, but this year we'll also do a one-day workshop where we teach people about the displays and optics from my side, but as also the sensing elements, the second half of the day. We'll have experts from Google, Meta, et cetera, joining us for keynotes, panels, and then some hands-on instructions where you can see me actually tear apart some glasses live. So register for that. Registration just opened, and we'll see you there.
All right. Well,
I think that's it for today.
Bye. We got.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you later.